On the Track is a web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Downs and this is Lilith Tinkerbell, who is rapidly becoming the real presenter of this show. At least she gets far more fan mail than I do, which is only right and proper. So, what have I been doing this last week? Well, I've been in bed for most of it because I've had a cold. It's one of the things that really pisses me off in life is when people claim they've had flu. I've had flu. It came on about 10 years ago. It came on the day before Christmas Eve and didn't leave until the end of March. It was a horrible experience and it damn nearly killed me and Karina. So it always annoys me when people claim that they've got flu when in fact they've got cold, or rhinovirus, which is something that our old friend Wally, I'm sure, thinks is a very impressive thing indeed. But I've been in bed all week and I haven't managed to achieve anything. And the only thing that's come out of this is that it's been 5 years since I quit smoking. And for the first time in that 5 years, I can now do a Tom Waits impersonation again. The captain is a one-eyed dwarf. He's rolling dice along the wharf. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So take this ring. We sailed tonight for Singapore. We're all as mad as hatters here. Have fallen for a tawny moor. Took off to the land of Nod. Drank with all the Chinamen. Walked the sewers of Paris. I danced along a coloured wind. Dangled from a rope of sand. You must say goodbye to me. That's not a bad Tom Waits impersonation. But unfortunately, there's very little call for being a Tom Waits impersonator in North Devon these days, and I'm sure if I went along to the job centre in my wheelchair and said, "Hey guys, I want a job as a Tom Waits impersonator," they'd probably give me the old heave-ho. At least that's what Lilith says anyway. But I've got sidetracked, as I always do. Hello, my name's John Downs, and welcome to another episode of On the Track. Oh, I think that's what they call a very swordfish trombones-like introduction.
I really like the old credits.
Well, for this next story, I want to say a very big thank you to, in no particular order, Nigel Wright, V. McCrinnan, and, of course, Bob Skinner. And can you guess what the story is about when I mention the words Bob and Skinner in the same sentence? Yes, it's another errant pinniped. No sooner had Wally the walrus been seen on the way back up to the frozen north after his sojourn down here in the British waters, but another walrus has turned up, and this is, from what we can gather, a completely different one. Another walrus has turned up on the east coast of the United Kingdom. A large walrus has been spotted on the Northumberland coastline just a month after the famed walrus Wally is believed to have returned to the Arctic. The walrus was first seen by tourists at Sea Houses Harbour about an hour from Newcastle, sadly not on the Tyne, or else Davey Curtis would have been able to sing.
The walrus on the Tyne is all mine, all mine. The walrus on the Tyne is all mine. The walrus on the Tyne is all mine, all mine. The walrus on the Tyne is all mine.
Andrew Douglas, aged 49, who owns a boat tour company, said that he'd never seen a walrus in that area before. If it's climate change, I don't know. Whether it's just a fluke, I don't know. But it's just absolutely amazing. And so I just pray for people to give it a bit of space and let them just enjoy it for what it is. Local wildlife website Natural Newbiggin tweeted a photograph of the new walrus, saying, "Walrus in Sea Houses Harbour. Surprise visitor this morning. Not Wally, but thought to be Freya, an immature female seen in Germany and Holland in the last few weeks." Andy Sisson from the British Divers Marine Life Rescue told the Northumberland Gazette, "It's a juvenile female, may well be Freya. She's bigger than a bull seal, perhaps 3/4 of a ton. There's been a lot of interest in her today. She's been attracting a steady stream of spectators all day, but people have also been very compliant in keeping their distance. She's tucked up on the ballast ricks in Sea Houses Harbour, mostly resting, and appears to be stable. The Tynemouth Seal Hospital has issued an update to warn people to keep their distance from the walrus." Here I think I should tell you that Mr. Graham used to live in Newbiggin, and Miss Maxine has got a cat called Freya. Coincidence, or sign of something more sinister going on? Sorry, Hennis, they're just coincidences. But the real mystery is what has caused these two walruses to move from the Arctic down to the much milder waters around the British coastline. I was chatting to V. McCrinnan last night on Facebook Messenger, and he came up with a theory which I find totally cogent and totally believable. I've been worried for a long time about why global warming, climate change, would have meant that animals from the frozen north would suddenly move into warmer waters. Surely they would have gone further north into the colder weather that they liked. But V came up with an idea. Walruses in particular live mostly off stationary bivalves from the bottom of the ocean. And unlike fish, which can move by swimming from one place to another, bivalves really can't. And so the desalination of the northern waters caused by the melting of ice caps could have had an appalling effect on the mussels and cockles and other bivalves found in those waters. And so, as an attempt to find more food sources, brave walruses may well be travelling further south in search of more plentiful supplies of bivalves. This actually makes an awful lot of sense to me, and I wish I'd thought of it myself. Well done, V. The next story comes once again from the desk of my old friend Nigel Wright, who once upon a time used to drive the CFZ around places, and we even wrote a book together. Look at this. Now, I'm only too aware and very grateful for the fact that we have viewers all over the world, and so it is for the benefit of these viewers that I would like to explain that there are different types of newspaper in the United Kingdom, some of which are better and more trustworthy sources than others. And on this occasion, Nigel has brought me a story from one of the most trustworthy of the newspapers that exist in this sceptred isle, the Daily Star. Now, don't get me wrong here. I'm not going to be all hoity-toity and snobby about the tabloid press. I've worked for the Daily Star, I've worked for the late and unlamented News of the Screws, and I've worked for the Sun. And to be quite honest, of all the newspapers that I've worked for, and that includes the more so-called respectable press, I think I would probably enjoy working for the Daily Star most of all, because the Daily Star is the only newspaper that really gives room for somebody of my talents to make up amusing bollocks with rhyming alliterative headlines. So, I'm not going to be snotty about the Daily Star. I'm not even going to be snotty about British Bigfoot sightings, because, read my lips, back in January 2003, I saw one. So yes, I know these things exist. Whether or not they can have a physical objective reality on our plane, I don't know, but I suspect that they can. And so I'm not going to be snotty about any of the evidence presented in this article. I'm certainly not going to jump on the bandwagon condemning it. What I am going to do is to point out a small matter of semantics. Cryptozoology is the study of unknown animals. Slender Man, British Bigfoot, and other creatures like that, including Owl Man and the other creatures that I've written about in my life, are not cryptids. They are not something what cryptozoology is about. And I just wish that people would realize this. They are something completely different. They are something else entirely. If I were to hazard a guess, I would say it has far more to do. All of these things have far more to do with the Robert Anton Wilson and Timothy Leary model of reality than they do with anything involving flesh and blood carbon-based life forms. However, that doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't be studying these things. My whole career is based around a book on one of Britain's most interesting zooform phenomena. And yes, that term, zooform phenomena, things which appear to be animals but which are not animals. Guess who invented it? Moi. So, if any of you out there in British Bigfoot researcher land are going to think, oh, there's John Downes being snotty and not accepting our research, I'm not doing anything of the sort. I am just saying that it is not cryptozoological. Capiche? The other day, Miss Maxine sent me this footage which she took out of her bedroom window. Is it a dove or is it an albino pigeon, she asked. And I wrote back saying, well, I thought they were the same thing. But actually they're not. And the story about doves and pigeons, even domesticated doves and pigeons, is really quite a complicated and interesting one. I want to backpedal now to the mid-1960s when the 7 or 8-year-old Jonathan, me, over half a century ago, was on holiday from his home in Hong Kong, staying with his grandmother and grandfather in their rather peculiar homemade bungalow in Greatley in Hampshire. Like everywhere else, the landscape has changed massively in the last 55 years. It looks far more gentrified and, dare I say, bourgeois than it ever used to. But the pictures from the air don't look anywhere near as beautiful and lush and green as I remember my grandparents' garden being. My grandmother was a remarkable woman, and she was a very keen bird watcher, and she was massively excited because in her garden a pair of birds called collared doves had recently set up house and were, she believed, nesting, and that was a really, really big deal for her. And I remembered ever since then how excited she was about the collared doves, and ever since then collared doves have been one of these big birds in my personal avian iconography, except for the fact that it's not a big deal anymore, because collared doves are now found all over the place and are quite common in the UK. We even have them in the garden here. In fact, we had a rather embarrassing situation some years ago when one of the people working for us blogged in the middle of the winter that he had seen turtle doves in our garden. Well, turtle doves are incredibly rare migrants, and they're not found in Devonshire in the middle of the winter, despite what he said. And I'm certain, as was everybody else who laughed at his blog post, that what he saw was collared doves. Now, as regular viewers will know, I've always been interested in birds that have expanded their range massively, and the Eurasian collared dove is one of these. It's not migratory, but it's strongly dispersive. Over the last 100 years, it's been one of the great colonizers of the bird world, travelling far beyond its native range to colonize colder countries, becoming a permanent resident in several of them. Its original range at the end of the 19th century was warm, temperate and subtropical Asia, from Turkey east to southern China and south through India to Sri Lanka. In 1838 it was reported in Bulgaria, but not until the 20th century did it expand across Europe, appearing in parts of the Balkans between 1900 and 1920, and then spreading rapidly northwest, reaching Germany in 1945, Great Britain by 1953, breeding for the first time in 1956, Ireland in 1959, and the Faroe Islands in early 1970s. And, as we have seen, my grandmother's garden in Greatley, just outside Andover, sometime in the mid-1960s. Domesticated or Barbary doves have been known in Europe since at least the 16th century, and it seems a good bet that they were probably domesticated in North Africa considerably before that. They have been long thought to be a domesticated subspecies of the Eurasian collared dove, but sadly, for the smoothness of this segment, this is unlikely to be true. It's probably true that they are a domesticated subspecies of the closely related African collared dove. But as Barbary doves can interbreed with both species of collared dove and produce viable offspring, I suppose in the grand scheme of things it doesn't really matter. But what about pigeons, I hear you ask? Well, they're something else entirely. There are three species we need to deal with here. First, the stock dove. The words pigeon and dove do seem to be quite interchangeable with many of these species, but the stock dove is the rarest of the resident British pigeons, but it is still quite widely distributed across the British Isles. The biggest of the British pigeons is the wood pigeon, and there is a pair of very noisy ones who have been breeding year after year in the CFZ gardens. And then the third species, and this is where it gets a little bit complicated, is the rock pigeon. And the rock pigeon, which I know sounds like a really, really cool name for a all-girl rock band. In fact, the daughters of an ex-girlfriend of mine always wanted to have a band called the Wild Rock Doves. and I always encouraged them in this ambition. I strongly suspect that nothing came of it, because although their mother and I parted company not on the best of terms, I was on good terms with the children, and I think if one of them had become famous as a rock and roll singer, they would have phoned me up to tell Uncle John all about it. However, I'm digressing, as so often I do, because the wild rock dove is the ancestor of the bird that when I was a young boy, Mary Poppins was exhorting us to feed for twopence a bag, and which are now found in their many, many millions. I remember when Graham and I were in Puerto Rico in 1998 that I managed to really annoy the producer of the show we were filming, Marcus Sully. He was a bird watcher, and I asked him if he knew how many pigeons there were in the world, wild pigeons, feral pigeons, and he thought I was just being an arse. Well, I don't think I was, and today I found the answer. It's approximately 120 million. And if you look at these pigeons here, some of them have got the same, in fact the majority of them have got the wild rock dove coloration, but others have different coloration, which means that they have got various strains of domesticated pigeons' bloodline in their ancestry. But the big question is, what was the pigeon or dove that Miss Maxine filmed out of her bedroom window? Now, the interesting thing about this is that she was both right and wrong. It didn't have to be either a white dove or an albino pigeon, because the genes for albinism have to be present in both doves and pigeons to make them white. So it could have been an albino pigeon, or it could have been an albino dove. This has been a very long, drawn-out, shaggy pigeon story, and the answer to it is, Miss Maxine, dear, I don't know. It could be either. My gut feeling, looking at it, is that it's an albino pigeon of some description, albino domesticated pigeon. But until we get some closer up film, I really don't know.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And as the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little studio, wants me to remind you, always press the notification bell. Otherwise you won't be told when there's a new show to watch. And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it? Well, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the end of another episode. I'd like to say thank you very much indeed for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it educational, edifying, and I still can't remember the other things to be able to do an alliteration of ease. And no, I've never taken ease, so that was not a drug reference. I want to do my best to try and make this show as edifying, educational, entertaining. I did it that time. Educational, entertaining, edifying, and all sorts of other things beginning with E as I can. But here we are at the end of this show. I'd like to say a big thank you, as always, to Carl and to Louis and to Graham, and this episode particularly to Nigel, to V and to Bob Skinner for their input, and to Maxine for the film of the dove, which may not be a dove, and to everybody else involved. And just thank you guys. I really enjoy doing these shows, and the thing that I enjoy nearly as much as doing the shows is when we do the live premiere on a Saturday afternoon, and me and V and Louis and everybody else meet up in the live chat, and we're being silly and rude to each other, and it's a jolly nice community building experience. And it's probably, apart from making the films, my most favourite part of the week. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for indulging me in this. And so, although it's over for this episode, we'll be back in a week's time, because Saturday afternoon at 3 is CFZ on the Track time. And if I'm there watching you, and you're there watching me, Lilith and I will be seeing you, V. Ha ha ha! You missed it.